Hello, YouTube. Welcome back. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest, Chase Denomme. Chase is a growth design wizard and awesome community facilitator at growthdesigners.co. That's where I met Chase. I have to say, Chase will be my go-to person to chat about anything growth design related. And he is currently leading growth-focused product teams at Vidyard, where he connects the dot between business and product design. He also claims he is the Canadian who owns the most amount of tropical floral shirts. Welcome to the show, Chase.
Thanks so much, Rand. Thanks for having me on. And I'm glad I'm living up to my tropical shirt.
Yeah, I know.
Bio.
Flora's theme today.
Love it.
So,
Love it.
yeah, I have to ask, what's the big deal with floral shirts?
I've just always really liked color. I mean, so I live in Canada. I'm from Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. So we get a lot of snow here, and I like to just keep the summer going all year round. So I've always liked to have really bright, colorful, strange shirts. I'm a weird Canadian, I know.
Awesome. So, why don't we start by you telling us a little bit more about yourself and maybe your journey into growth design?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Chase. So nice to meet everybody who's watching this. My journey into growth design is probably a pretty windy road that was always going to end up into growth design. So I feel like I was born pretty much right into it. So my dad was a designer as well. He was a creative director and partner at an advertising agency. So from like a super early age, I got exposure to not just design, but also to how design can actually have business impact really early on. And that pretty much carried like all throughout school. Those were like design and business were just the two things that I was always really passionate about and really cared about. Ended up going to doing my undergrad in arts and business and then my master's in business, entrepreneurship and technology. So kept going with like both art and design. When I started working, I actually didn't start in design. I started more in business focused roles as like a marketing and business analyst. And all of those jobs, funny enough, ended up using, design practices in one way or another. And I think my big sort of aha moment was when I was working at SAP when I was quite a bit younger. At the time, SAP was going through a pretty big culture shift, bringing design thinking into their agile development process, lean UX. And I was working on some pretty cool teams, an app house team that was working on like building really quick apps, and another team that was working on strategic like innovation projects. And I think my aha moment was just like, okay, I can my ability to actually connect the dots between business and design is like a real superpower. There's not a lot of designers that have that big business focus. And as well, there's not a lot of people in business that like really understand how much of a strategic advantage design can be for business. So that was sort of my aha moment, kept going down that path and ended up pretty much shifting entirely towards design, specifically product design, working with a lot of startup founders on, leading design for new to like growth stage companies, and then ended up working, running my own tech startup for a while, which is a fun experience, another no code startup a long time ago. And then ended up working at an accelerator center in town and starting. So I had a portfolio of clients there. And then we created a startup studio, which is essentially like a internal studio of designers who would run design sprints with our startups and help them validate and experiment really quickly early on to kind of de-risk their business ideas. And then after that, did a stint at a product design agency, and then a year ago joined the wonderful Vidyard team, and ever since have been just working on growth focused product teams at Vidyard.
Yeah, that is so cool. So after your a variety of different type of experiences, what's the draw for growth design? Um, why is growth design so important?
I think probably the biggest thing for me is just being outcome focused and seeing my impact. So what I was always looking for in design jobs is being able to see my impact on the business. And I think that's sort of like the magic secret sauce of growth design is if you're in a growth design role, you're going to see that impact on the business and know the value that you're bringing to the team. So my mission has always just been to work with passionate problem solvers and really just help align business goals with user goals to create these really delightful experiences that deliver a shared value between the business and the user. And yeah, the growth design just kind of lives right at that intersection of all my favorite things, whether it's business, design, psychology, analytics. So a lot of the wonderful things that I would just stay up late at night thinking about and working on, growth design brings all those together magically under one kind of niche discipline. So.
Yeah, very cool. I definitely resonate with that. Um, why don't we talk more about your most recent experience at Vidyard?
Mhm.
Can you, for the viewers who might not be familiar with Vidyard, um, do you mind telling us a little bit more about Vidyard and your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vidyard is a video software platform. We have gone through a really, really cool stage. So Vidyard traditionally was a sales-led growth organization, mostly selling to like enterprise. And before I joined, so I think about half a year before I joined, they launched a free product, a freemium product, and totally shifted the organization from sales-led to product led. So I joined at probably the coolest time to like jump in and have an impact as a designer working at like a product led growth company. And so the team I joined was at the time it was the free team. So we were looking after that freemium experience. We actually started a really small growth team out of that was just working on very small experimentation projects. And then since then, it's just evolved. And over the last year, we've been growing like crazy. That growth team was initially focused on acquisition and specifically like virality with our product. And now we have teams focused on acquisition, activation, retention, and conversion. So I've worked on all those teams. My focus right now, though, is on activation and retention. So really just getting those new users in and connecting them to some authentic value right away, and then helping them establish some positive habits with our platform that are going to help them succeed with video.
Yeah, very cool. A lot of things to unpack there. So first, you mentioned there is a transition for Vidyard from sales-led organization to a product-led organization. What are the difference? What is product-led organization, and how is that different from the sales-led?
Yeah. So yeah, like traditionally the buying experience has just changed so much over the last several years. So traditionally it was, Vidyard was selling to like the CMOs. So, do a presentation. Hey, does your company have this problem? Would this solution fit that problem? Typical like sales pitch to C-level, and then company adopts it. Now we're seeing obviously a really, really big shift where the individual contributors are starting to sign up for a free product, experience some of that value before paying, and then are kind of pushing it upstream to get the company bought into that those tools. So at the time we're competing with large companies like YouTube and Vimeo, and obviously wanted to have some sort of free offering to kind of compete and hook users into our product. So that was kind of the big shift. We have a really cool product as well, where a user signs up, they create a video, they share that video gets viewed by other people, and thankfully a large number of those people end up signing up because they get some of that perceived value of what other people are accomplishing with Vidyard, and kind of hooks them into the experience. So the product is actually driving growth in itself, which is a lot more sustainable. Obviously, product led doesn't mean that we're not still heavily tied to sales. So it's the whole organization working together, just around creating a really great product experience and tying everything together.
Yeah, definitely. Does move the transition into product led changes the company's focus around growth as well?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we do still have we have a growth marketing team. So we do still have obviously everything that we focused on when we were sales led, we're still focused on. The difference being that now there's a lot of pipeline that comes right from the free product. So users come in through the free product. They kind of start off as just an evaluator, and then they start completing certain behaviors and hitting certain milestones where they go from, being an evaluator to a beginner to, they're hooked in and they're a regular inside of the product, and then eventually a champion user. And at that time, we often see lots of users within the same company that are using the free product, which is a good signal for our sales team. So for the sales team, it's just another, large pipeline for them to be able to pull in business.
Yeah, there's. It sounds like there's such a complex dynamic going on, like with freemium product, especially. So you have the acquisition piece, and you still have the growth marketing effort, and you still have sales led initiatives. And then you also mentioned you're currently focusing on activation retention, which is important. And with freemium, there's definitely going to be the monetization, upsell, cross sell, and all the good stuff. So, out
Yeah.
of all of these things, how do you decide what makes sense for you to be focusing on right now? How do you find your focus? How do you prioritize your initiatives?
Yeah, it's so I think with any company that's just starting in growth, it's really tough in the beginning to know kind of where to start. You always have that big shiny idea. Yes, we're going to start a growth team. Everybody rallies behind it. This is going to be great, and then you never really know where to start. I think usually when coaching like startups and more early stage companies, the best approach is if you don't understand where you can have the most impact. A lot of times you might have a super clear view, right? There's probably companies that really like acquisition's not a problem. They have a ton of pipeline coming in that way. And if they have a really complicated product, probably like Webflow,
Tell me
activation
that.
becomes a really big challenge, right? You have so many users that are really passionate about no code. They're coming in, but it's such a complicated tool. And to actually get ramped up, activation might be probably like the biggest hurdle for the business to get over. And some companies will have a clear signal, both through like qualitative feedback that they hear when they're talking to customers, and also quantitative insights that they're seeing in the data. If you don't have those insights, it's more difficult. So my like recommendation on where to start would be to just map out that user journey. So rally the team together, map out that user journey, figure out what you do know and what you don't know. So that's usually a good start, is based on the data, based on what we're hearing from customers. We know all of these things, and you can start identifying what's working well, what's not working well. And sort of start, creating some of those affinity maps around where the biggest problem areas might be for your business. And that will usually help you find the best areas to start. But you still might not know. So I think in the beginning, it's always good to sort of cast a wider net. So, just because there are some bigger problem areas, some areas might move the needle more than other areas. So it's great to kind of cast a bit of a wide net, experiment in a few different areas to figure out where you can actually have the most impact. In the case of like Vidyard, we started in one area, and obviously just because the scale of the team was growing, we were able to create teams around other focused areas and have them really laser focus around given problems there.
Yeah. So, what about once you decide on a focus area for your team? Um, you tried a bunch of things, you cast a wider net, and you found the biggest area of impact. How do you brainstorm experiment ideas, and how do you prioritize them?
Yeah. So brainstorming, I really love opportunity solution trees. So again, like going through that customer journey, figuring out like it's great to have frameworks, around just like how you talk about the user journey, but creating an opportunity solution tree. So you go through that, try to identify some problems based on the qualitative and quantitative inputs that you have, And then what you would do around those problems is come up with some hypotheses, right? So like we have a hypothesis that if we do X, we're going to have X impact, and you filter that into a bunch of experiments, which kind of creates your roadmap of where you're going to go. So I think that's like a really good way of just figuring out where the team's going to focus their energy. And then there's tons of different frameworks for prioritizing. Like we tend to use like RICE as like a framework for figuring out where, but for the most part, it's kind of explore and expand. So explore, it's like, let's go explore in all these areas. So do a ton of early, exploration research, do a lot of customer discovery, and try to learn as much as possible. If there's questions that you don't have answers to, those are the questions that you want to validate and answer in some sort of way. Usually experimentation, whether it's running an A/B test or whether it's like a no code experiment that you're just getting that answer to, you can start running those tests to try to gather that knowledge, get to having the context that you need, and then that should kind of help you figure out, the areas where you've had the most impact. And once you've explored and figure out kind of where that goal is going to be, and once you figure out where the goal is, it's time to expand and like laser focus into that area, and that's where you start to create more robust experiences. Personalization can come in. So you've seen a little bit of value, and you really need to start extracting more at that point.
Yeah, awesome. That's a really good framework. Thank you for sharing.
No
I'm
problem.
curious, out of your time at Vidyard, what would you say is the project that you've done that has the most amount of impact?
I'm not sure about impact, but definitely in my opinion, the coolest story is onboarding. So I obviously onboarding is super important for product led growth. We can't just drop users into experience, especially if it's a complicated one, like something like HubSpot. There's so many different, features that you can use in that product. I'm assuming Webflow would be the same, right? There's so many things you can do in there. So onboarding is really important. We were struggling to kind of get that buy-in to actually have like a bit larger focused project around onboarding. And there's so much you can do with onboarding. Like the scope can get so big, so fast. And so what we did is we just simplified it as much as possible and broke it into its smallest piece, which we did a bunch of research. We kind of came up with what we thought our ideal onboarding framework would look like. And we used a no-code tool. AppQues is what we use. So we use a tool, AppQues. So without any development effort, we didn't need to actually, get the entire team bought into kicking off this big onboarding project. Myself and the product manager at the time just, set up this flow in AppQues within a day, and we were able to launch that, test it, and get the answers that we needed to our hypothesis. So at the time, it was just let's welcome users, ask them a couple of questions, and then guide them to the right place based on those questions. So just like a really quick straight line onboarding experience through AppQues. And the experiment went amazing. We had a lot of impact on that experiment, and that actually got us sort of kind of kicked off what ended up becoming a full team, the activation team, and obviously a large portion of our focus on that team is around onboarding right now. So after that experiment, we had the buy-in to kind of bring some people together, run a little sprint around what our ideal onboarding experience would look like, and then breaking out that large experience into some small experiments that we would kind of validate along the way. So that's definitely, I love that when companies get big, it's really easy to just jump into A/B testing everything and building full experiences. And so I love just that scrappiness of like a startup, even as the company, gets larger, and running no code experiments, getting some of those answers, and then kind of getting the buy-in to, invest more money. So.
Yeah, that's such a good story, and congratulations. And
Yeah.
that seems like a really cool journey. And back in Amplitude, we do use a lot of AppQs as well.
Nice.
Love that tool. Um, I think you're probably competing with my PM partner back then, Mike Otavi Brennan. He is probably the biggest AppQ's power user I've seen. So
Awesome.
now I don't know. Maybe it's you, maybe it's Mike. But anyways, when you are launching things like from third party, like AppQs into your product, how do you measure? Like you mentioned, you still launched it as some sort of experiment. So did you do a split traffic and 50%?
That particular one we didn't. It was just different cohorts that we were kind of
I see.
looking at. But there was enough of a difference that we were really confident in that. And so what we ended up using is AppQs wasn't going to be sort of our final solution for onboarding. We use that as just like a testing tool to get something out and learn. And so that experience that we built in AppQs, we ended up building that into our product. And so we had a little bit more control over that experience. But yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So what was your success metric that you measured for that one?
Yeah, so activation was
Yep.
activation was the main thing that we were looking at for that one. But the other thing that we really want to have answers to was would people even complete the survey? Would people answer the questions and go through? And there was the option to also just exit out and not go through that at all. So we want to look at how the behavior changed on a user who would go through those survey questions and get recommended to the right option versus somebody who just hopped right into the product. So that was something that we really wanted to learn. And then I think it was like 80% of users ended up filling out the survey. So we had a pretty high response rate on the survey, which again, more of a, I guess it was both like a business and user goal, but we really, really want to validate that we could start collecting more of this information up front to start personalizing our experience. At Vidyard, again, probably similar to Webflow, like we have so many different users that come in. So many different use cases that we appeal to, so many different industries, different confidence levels with, being in front of a camera and using video. And so all of those users are going to need very, very different experiences. And because they're not, onboarded by a, customer experience rep and really handheld through the experience, the product needs to do that. So we need to kind of productize the rest of the business who used to do onboarding for customers, going into like enterprise products and really just start personalizing that experience a little bit more. So we just wanted to validate that asking these questions, users were going to answer them, and we were going to be able to start collecting some of that data to deliver more value for them.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you mentioned survey because at Webflow, we do have a survey. And when I first joined, I was like, oh, that's a very long survey. But we actually have a high enough completion rate. So I didn't I didn't
Awesome.
go in and just changed everything as I thought I would. Um, and I know that you've done a lot of work in personalization as well. Like you mentioned a little bit in your answer earlier. That's something's top of mind for me as well, or probably anyone who is working on onboarding or activation, because there's really no one size fit all onboarding.
Absolutely.
Like with all the different personas, I can only imagine how many personas you have at Vidyard. And I do remember seeing some of the original Chase diagrams that's like beautifully made and beautifully complex. So why don't we switch topic to talk more about personalization?
Yeah.
So maybe before we dive in, can we talk about like what do you think personalization is and why it matters?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, personalization is really like a strategy that uses data to just create authentically unique experiences for users. So kind of like I mentioned before, with product-led growth and just moving into these self-serve experiences, the product really needs to do the heavy lifting in terms of tailoring that experience every step of the way. And usually to do that, we need data, right? So we kind of leverage that data and, define different ways of segmenting our users and crafting those experiences. But super important that the experience feels, at Vidyard, I'd say, we want it to feel like there's a Vidyardian with you every step of the way. And I think even at startups, personalization can get really, really complex and difficult. And again, the scope can be huge, but there's simple ways that even startups can start personalizing experiences. And those little things you'll notice, especially in user interviews, really craft those moments of delight where, a user is going through, and whether it's just, they signed up and they're seeing their name on like the welcome screen, like small moments like that make it feel like they're not just onboarding into like a product, they're actually building a relationship with the product.
Yeah, one thing I recently noticed that does this really well is BarkBox.
Yeah.
Yeah, they ask for your pet's name and then start using your pet's name, and they ask for their like allergies and maybe like breed, so they can really customize a box for you. I think a lot of pet product does really well in
Yeah.
that. Um, and like apparently personalization is not just use your name in your greetings, is much more than that. And a lot of times I know growth team struggles with
Mm-hmm.
doing more of a personalization because it requires a certain level of maturity for the team. Like you probably have
Yeah.
to have a one size fits all onboarding first before you
Yeah.
want to personalize. You want to have a certain level of understanding of your key personas.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it seems really daunting that there might be some technical infrastructure that needs to be put in place, or acquire third party tools to help you
Yeah.
do some of the personalization work. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you maybe recommend for teams that are new to personalization to get started?
Well, the first piece of advice is probably just to start small. I know, I think again, a lot of people in growth, that we get passionate. We're passionate people. We get excited so much about tactics, and I think it's really easy to hear about other companies that are doing personalization and say we got to do all of that. We want to personalize the whole experience, and like you said, a lot of the times the maturity is just not there. The tech infrastructure is just not there. So my biggest piece of advice would be to just start small. Start small and think about small wins that you can start validating that approach actually works for the context of your business and your users. And to get started, you probably just want to start thinking about breaking down your segmentation. So just in terms of thinking about what do I need to think about when I'm thinking about personalization, the biggest thing would be how are we going to segment our users, right? So there's obvious ways you can do it, by like the customer tier, by use case, by persona, by the part of the customer journey that they're moving through, the confidence or experience level that they might have with that product or that product area, and or actually like specific behavioral milestones that you're crafting and setting for them to hit. But I really just started thinking about what would change our users' experience, like how should our experience be personalized, and thinking about that segmentation. And then the next piece is thinking about the data infrastructure and like what do you need to have in place, what connects to what. And a lot of the times you can simplify it down to probably just a couple tools to run some simple experiments, even in the case like app queues and doing, no code solutions, connecting app queues to whatever, data tool you use, like Heap. You can do stuff like that. And it's usually pretty easy to get started, but it gets complicated really quickly. So just start small.
Yeah. Any small wins projects you can share with us today? Maybe you go give us a better view into what does a personalization project look like.
Yeah, sure. I can't. So I think even like Vidyard, I would say we're super early in personalization. And the onboarding survey that I mentioned is definitely like our big start. And we've tried to like really tell the team, this is why this survey matters so much. It's really easy to look at the survey and say, oh, it's a boring onboarding survey. But the onboarding survey is so valuable to the business and is going to help us create so much value for our users. And so it's a big win. I would say just like getting that survey in place is the biggest win. But in terms of what personalization looks like, I can kind of walk through like a full example user journey where you sign up for a product and you get hit with a welcome page that says your name, and maybe it even grabs, your profile image from like Google or something. And then it asks you some questions. So as soon as you answer some of those questions, maybe even throughout the rest of the onboarding survey, your experience is already getting tailored. So I worked at a startup in the past that was a marketplace, and people were either filling out essentially like a resume or like a profile. And on the other side, they were filling out like jobs that they were essentially like tailoring out. And as you start answering questions, it's actually crafting like your portfolio for you. So it actually starts customizing and showing, by answering these questions, this is what your experience is going to look like. So you can start to customize it as you go through. And then as soon as they get into the product, in terms of activation, change that experience for them, right? In the case of Webflow, I imagine like you might get designers that are signing up, but you might also just get founders who are trying to create maybe a SaaS website. Maybe you just give them a free template that has the bare bones of like what a SaaS, website might look like. In our case, we're a video company, so we could probably give videos that are super relevant for like what type of video that they would create, or give them at least like inspiration around those things. So that's kind of how you can start crafting personalized experiences around activation. And then for retention, you can start recognizing positive behaviors that they're doing and sending out weekly digests. So kind of like sending out like I know the company Fellow does this, where they'll show you like you had X number of meetings this week, you're on a roll. So giving you kind of that encouragement, but highlighting some of the things that you were accomplishing throughout the week. And then as soon as you start becoming into that champion user and you're getting primed to upgrade, giving you relevant, PQLs, product qualified leads that aren't just like, okay, you've been in the product for X long, we're just going to hit you with a giant splash screen of upgrade right now. That's probably going to just frustrate the user. But if they're really diving into a specific area of the product, and seeing some value, maybe that's a good opportunity moment to tell them about the extra value that they could have if they were to upgrade. So start creating more personalized experience around conversion and moving them up into upper tier packages. So that's kind of some examples along the way of what personalization might look like.
Yeah. Really, really good examples. And I want to do all of those things. And we did do the template experiment at Webflow. It needs more work, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for chatting with us and dive into some of the more interesting aspect of growth design today. I think with my viewer, a lot of them are designers who are interested in learning more about growth or getting into growth, or growth designer that wants to be a better growth designer. So I wonder, what are some of the most important resources that have made you such a great growth designer?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could probably speak for another hour about resources, but in terms of books, like probably like my, like top books are Hacking Growth, Hooked, Growth Driven Design are probably some of my like top hit books, as well as Testing Business Ideas. That's another really excellent book. And then in terms of like courses, the Reforge puts out like exceptional content. They have some really good courses around growth. Like I think anybody getting into growth would take a lot of value in the frameworks that they present, and just like the language around how to talk about growth. It just gives such a great starting point. And then in terms of community, obviously the wonderful growth designers community, which we are both a part of. There's so many awesome designers in that group. It's really hard, I find, to like connect with other product designers that are working within growth specifically. So that community is, super tight knit community. Lots of fantastic people working at great companies doing really cool things. So definitely a good resource.
Yeah, join the community. I will put
Yeah.
all of the books and the courses and the community link in the description. So if you're
Awesome.
interested,
Awesome.
yeah. So how should the audience follow you on the internet?
Uh, I'm probably not super active on the internet, although I should be. But LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the two best spots.
Great. I will also put that into the description box. All right,
Awesome.
Chase. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been
No problem.
enlightening every time I talk to you. Uh, we should chat more, and I also want to learn more about your startup experience and such.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thanks so much, Rand. I'm super excited to be on and have all of your wonderful followers listen to me. So thanks so much for your time.